Okay, welcome everybody to this next interview of the She Shakes the World interview series. And I have the great pleasure in presenting to you one of my clients actually. She's called Mona Sobhani and she is an amazing author. Wow, she's doing incredible things and I really want you to hear what she has to say. She's written this book called Proof of Spiritual Phenomena, a neuroscientist discovery of the ineffable mysteries of the universe. And I wanted to bring her on here because Mona has come from a very science background. She's a neuroscientist, she's got a PhD, and for a very long time, Mona disregarded spirituality, religion. It wasn't something that she agreed with at all um, until she had what I would say a sort of like identity crisis, and she was suddenly led down this route of going into spirituality and religion and finding out a lot more about that. And she's going to share with you today how she's managed to bridge those two worlds together and actually overcome quite a lot of her own fears and worries about having to share this with the science world, because I know that was very difficult for you to put yourself out there going, actually, I've got this science background, I'm a neuroscientist, but actually there is more, and I have proof that there's more now as well, and that you are going to share that. So welcome, Mona. Thank you for being here, and just share with us how this all began, because I know it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Rachel. So yeah, my story starts with me being just a very typical hard-nosed, skeptical neuroscientist, a very traditionally trained scientist, and I was anti-spirituality and anti-religion actually, for a number of reasons. But part of it is because when you get into science, the training is a little bit like that. Like anything, I mean, they're not actively anti-spirituality per se, but everything is only all the conversations, it's all around science, it's all around scientific method, rationality, using logic,
Mm,
and things that are non mainstream come up in conversation, they're kind of dismissed.
yes.
So I had that worldview. And by the time I graduated with my PhD, I definitely was like very indoctrinated in that world. And I think before my PhD, I was a little more open to like coincidences and just thinking the universe was, interesting. But
Yes.
by the time you leave, our scientific paradigm teaches us that it's called scientific materialism, so that the world is material, made of matter, it's physical, and that everything can be reduced in that way and studied in that way. Like it's called reductionist as well. And so anything that doesn't fall in that paradigm is not real. So
Okay.
I left with that. And then,
Yes.
but I'm also, I'm Persian by heritage. And in our culture, as in many cultures, there's a tradition of divination using coffee grounds. And
Yes.
so yeah, like a thicker coffee that you drink and leave in the cup, flip it over, and images form. And so my grandmother used to read coffee grounds for people, and then my mother learned from her, and they were both allegedly very good. And so but I always ignored this. It was like in the background of our family parties, and I never understood it, didn't pay attention. But when I was in graduate school and I would go home, my mom started, kind of absentmindedly, just as we would have coffee together, she would read for me.
Wow.
And I, didn't even pay attention, but over time realized that a lot of the things that she said would come true. And so it kind of got my attention. Because she would also say really specific things, very detailed things about situations, like about people's personalities or the way they look, or like things that were meaningful to the situation, but you couldn't have guessed if you weren't familiar with it. And normally she wouldn't be familiar with it, right? Like it might be things that I was dealing with at school or in the lab that I wouldn't tell her about.
Yes.
So it caught my attention, and then there were two big events that really caught my attention. So in 2016, she had been reading for me. I was taking copious notes. My friends would fight over reading. So I don't know if I believed in it, but I just didn't think about it. I just had this cognitive dissonance of like, okay, here's my identity of my scientific worldview. And then there's this weird thing in my life that I actually pay attention to and listen, but I have no explanation for how it works.
Okay.
And so in yeah, it, kept it separate.
Yeah,
And then
understood.
in 2016, for 5 weeks before this event happened, my mom kept seeing it in the coffee, and she doesn't usually give bad news, but for this one, she was like, "Oh, I feel like I need to warn you.
Mm,
I think you're going to get really bad news." But she wouldn't tell me what it was because she didn't want to like make it a self-fulfilling thing.
yes.
I mean, 5 weeks later, one of my professors at USC, who I had worked with on my dissertation a little bit, he was killed by one of our students in the program.
Wow.
And so that was upsetting, obviously.
Mm,
But the fact that she had seen it every week for 5 weeks beforehand, and then because when I told her, she was like, "That's what it was. It was a death. It was
mm,
very unusual." She's like, "I've never seen anything like it. I didn't even know how to describe it." She's like, "And I didn't want to say it because I didn't want it to be true." She's like, "But I knew it was someone like a little bit, like outside your life, but
yes.
part of your life." And
Got you.
so that shook me. I mean, I didn't do anything about it, but it just kind of scared me. And I was like, well, what does that mean? Was it his fate or his destiny? Or does time not work the way that we think it does? I mean, it must not. She's getting information about the future and
Yes.
like so far in advance. And so I was just really shook, but I didn't do anything. I was just overwhelmed at my new job and continued. And then 2 years later, she saw a relationship coming in and it looked really positive and everything was good. And I was at a time where I didn't know it, but I wasn't happy. And I was like, yes, this relationship is gonna, subconsciously, I was like, this relationship is gonna save me.
Oh,
So
interesting.
it came and fell apart. And then but all of her details and predictions were right. But the only thing that was wrong was she was like, I don't know, I keep seeing it as positive. And then, in the moment, I was like, this is definitely not positive
Yes.
because I was. And so that was the kind of the event, the final event. I think of it as like I had a stool with legs and the legs just kept getting knocked out.
Yes,
And
I
that was the
see that.
one.
Yes.
Stool fell over. I was like depressed, sad. I felt despair for the first time. I lost hope and I was like, what is the point of this life? So I was very down. And then when I finally came a little bit out of the fog of depression, I was like, well, what are these readings? Like, why is she sometimes right or most of the time right?
Mm,
But is there such thing as fate or destiny? And so my friends were like, they knew some psychics that they claimed legit. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to go to a psychic. I was still like
yeah.
skeptical.
Yes.
And they're
Yeah.
like, your mom reads for you. What's the difference? And I'm like, okay. So my friends and I made this pseudo experiment kind of where we would go to these different psychics, the same psychics over time, and we'd swap readings because we all had different things going on in our lives to kind of just compare and see like, are these intuitives accurate or are they vague, which is the general consensus, like in
Yes.
mainstream the worldview. And so through that we found no, they were really specific to like specific events and things in our life, and they would be right on multiple variable. Like it was just statistically, it was
Yes.
not possible that they were just guessing.
Yes.
And so we all kind of were just, but there were still a lot of mysteries. It's not like we understood it because they weren't always right. And so we were just kind of interested. It was just for fun. And then in those readings, they would talk to me about karma and soul lessons and stuff. And I didn't
Mm,
understand that. I didn't believe in it. So I just wrote it down, but I didn't think
yeah.
about it.
Okay. You needed to
And
hear
then
it, but you didn't process it at the time.
yeah, I didn't process it. And then a few months later, like serendipitously, unrelated, I wasn't looking into spirituality at this point. I was listening to Chelsea Handler's podcast. She had this limited series podcast, and she was like a skeptic. She's very hard-nosed, or used to be. And she had Laura Lynn Jackson on, who was a psychic medium, and randomly on this one episode, and she starts telling the story of this soul lessons karmic thing. And I was like, whoa, this is what the intuitives told me. And so I turned it up, like I took notes. I was like, what is this? I've never even heard of this framework. It's so weird. And then on the episode, they also mentioned this book called Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. And they didn't say what it was about. They're just like, it's a psychiatrist case study. Everyone should read it. So I ordered it. That arrived. I start reading that. And I was like, it's a past life regression book. And I was like, well, what am I reading?
Mm, wow.
But in the book, he also outlines the same spiritual framework of, but in his case, he was like an atheist. I think he was, didn't believe in anything paranormal, very prestigious, had well credentialed from Yale and Columbia Law School. He was like chief of psychiatry. And he's telling this crazy story of like this patient who's being healed through past life regression. He's outlining the spiritual framework. And then he talks about the master spirits that come through his
Yes.
patient.
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there like, what is happening right now? Like, this is the third time I'm encountering this framework. I've never even heard of it. Now it's from a psychiatrist who's well credentialed. And so that was the kickoff of that book. Really changed a lot of things for me, because I was like, is this a phenomena? Like, this is crazy. So if someone goes into a hypnotic trance and you ask them to describe a framework, that's the spiritual framework that they describe. I was, as a scientist, I was like, that's weird. And then so that launched me on a reading, like actually doing research. And so
Yeah.
I started reading all the past life regression literature, which led me to other literature on reincarnation and near-death experiences. And then I was like, reading is fun, but I want to talk to people and I want to understand this. So I started interviewing the intuitives. I wanted to know what they felt, where they learned the framework. Like, I thought that they maybe grew up in families like that, but it turned out they didn't. A lot of their families didn't even believe them.
Welcome to
um,
my world. I
yeah,
grew up with an atheist family. So yeah, I'm with them on that. That happened to me.
yeah. So, which I thought was just even more fascinating.
Mm,
Oh, I was just like, oh, tell me all of it. And
yeah.
I interviewed my scientist colleagues because I was like, I don't even know what they believe in. Do they believe in anything paranormal or spiritual? And so they set me on this long quest to do, yeah, I interviewed people, I researched, I read, and then at some point people started giving me more scientific studies to read, actually, because there had been a
Amazing.
lot of work done on psychic phenomena. Actually, it had been really well studied by the US government. There were all these scientific peer-reviewed studies published, and there were so many, like it was from hundreds of labs. So, people like to say maybe there's fraud, or it comes only from one lab, so they're biased, but that wasn't true. It was like on so many variables, and they were so well designed. The statistics were stronger than, some of the other things we have in psychology and medicine. So I was just blown away by the
Yeah.
research, also that I didn't know about it, that nobody seemed to know about it. And so that kind of got me, like interested in, that's that kind of research.
Yeah.
And that's why the book is sort of called Proof of Spiritual Phenomena. It was like I was looking for actual proof, like scientific proof, which I did find. But like my identity was so wrapped up in my worldview and being smart and being a scientist that I started to have an identity
I
crisis
was going to
as this
ask,
was
how did you
happening.
navigate all of that? Because that must have been really difficult in many ways. You have this identity. This is who I am. And then this might be resonating with others listening. This is who I am. But actually, there's all this other stuff going on. How do I bring those two things together? How do I bridge the gap? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, that was the um, hard part. So it's basically flipping a worldview, because in our scientific materialist worldview, it's not, these things are called impossible phenomena. They are not possible, by the constraints of what we believe
I
make up
see.
the universe.
Yes.
And so you have to go outside of, at least for me, you have to go outside of that worldview. And I found a bunch of philosophies, other spiritual frameworks that explained other worldviews, that like we're more interconnected with the earth and with each other, that the fundamental building block of the universe is consciousness, not matter.
Yeah.
So I had to find other worldviews to account for this, but I found like a whole group of scientists and philosophers who believed in this, who were pushing. They created societies that I joined that were pushing for a post-materialist worldview, pushing for the study of these phenomena that could help us create a more comprehensive understanding of the universe, like an
Yeah.
accurate one. Because
Yeah.
right now we're just ignoring a huge swath of human experience
Yes. Do you
and
think there's
saying we have a model.
Do you think there's resistance? Do you think there's a resistance in the science world to actually admit that this might actually be going on? Because actually, that would then all that work and all that study and all that they've proven might not all be. Do you think they've actually got resistance to some of this?
Yeah, and actually, this goes back to the question you just asked that I didn't fully answer.
Go for it.
I think that is that there's two things. I mean, one, this is like the mainstream worldview, Western worldview, and this has come down to us from the time of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So even though that seems like a long time, that's only the last few hundred years of human history, and it's mostly just Western culture,
Mm.
although Western culture is spreading, all over the world. But it's so a little bit of it is that people really just believe that, and so they genuinely believe, and because it's in the media and everything, like everything is dismissive of these kinds of experiences, so
Yeah.
they genuinely believe it's not possible. And but back to like how it ties into my thing, it's also your identity of like, this goes to psychology, like the identity you've created to protect your ego, like a lot of scientists like myself, and I had to face this when I was doing this whole journey, was like, why do I feel so threatened? Because that's who I was. Like I felt threatened when someone would tell me something woo-woo, which I hate that
Wow.
word.
Yes.
I would feel like I would get angry. Like there was like this like anger from my, like literally my stomach, like my whole inside. I would get so angry and I'd be like, no, like that's stupid. That's harming humanity. These beliefs, we need to be rational and logical because this is the narrative kind of.
Yes.
But in this process, I was like, that's what I had to face. I was like, well, there's this bodily reaction, this ego reaction to this, but now I'm looking at scientific evidence for it, and I've experienced it myself with these incredible readings.
Yes.
And I started having precognitive dreams myself, and I'm like, so there's personal proof on top of scientific proof, and that comes into conflict with who I thought I was, and it
Mm.
was really difficult. So when people say they don't want to, I get it, they don't want, because it's
Yes.
hard.
It's
It's
massively
really
hard.
hard,
Yes.
yeah, to be
I
like
remember.
I was,
Go on,
yeah.
carry on.
But just to say, to admit like I was wrong, or
Mm.
I need to update my
Yes.
thinking is
Because I remember
hard.
reading. I remember reading, and you said at some point, actually, you're a scientist, and actually, you couldn't ignore the proof anymore, like of
Yes, yeah.
everything that you were getting, because actually there was so much proof how you couldn't deny its existence anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in
Yeah.
science, you follow evidence. I sometimes say this now, it's a catch 22, because like in science, you must follow the evidence, but the evidence took me to the belief in impossible things. But then our paradigm says you can't believe in impossible things. But then and so it was like this like catch 22 where I just kept going in circles. And until you realize that there's like the point in the circle that says you can't believe in impossible things, that's the one you have to look at. And you're like, why can't I believe in impossible things? And
Wow.
um, so it was a long journey and it was really hard. But so I think a lot of egos and identities and life's work for scientists is tied up in this. And we have a saying in science, actually, which is not about this stuff, just in general, that science advances one funeral at a time, because it's like the people who've been in the field doing their one thing will not let go of their theories, because that will make their whole life's work was garbage or wrong. So they
Yes.
won't let go of their theories. So they have to die for new scientists to come with new
Oh,
theories
wow.
to
Okay.
perpetuate. Yeah. And so it's a whole thing in science, actually, about scientific revolutions
Mhm.
and shifts in the paradigms that we
Yeah.
have. But this is part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is happening now? I know you've written this book, and I know it's launching. So how has it been received? How are you feeling about, and because I know we've obviously done some work around this, how are you feeling about having this out there in the world and actually being seen there in the neuroscience world? And uh, how are you managing that?
It's definitely been a very long road to
Mm.
being to accepting where I am, to being comfortable and confident. I'm probably still working on that, but I definitely feel better now, because a lot of and I try to frame it like this in my mind, in my book, and it's true. We call these exceptional human experiences, but they're actually typical human experiences.
Mm.
And something I found when I did the book, when I was talking to scientists and other people, was that they would like whisper their experiences to you. So if you talk to them confidentially, everyone will admit that they've had something weird happen to them. It's just that no one comes out to talk about it.
I
So
see.
now, as I'm coming out with this book, I've had a lot of scientists reach out to me, telling me their stories, excited to have someone to talk to about it. They call me kind of like in crisis, because they're like, oh, I haven't been able to tell anyone this. And
Wow.
so I feel more confident because I'm
Mm.
like, I know we're not alone. We just can't come out and say it. It's like kind of crazy. Like
Yeah.
what, even though we live in this modern time. So I feel encouraged by that.
Good.
And like I said, I found a whole group of scientists and philosophers who write about this and talk about this. So I joined them. So it's like a community. And of course, there's like strength in community. So
Yes.
that helps a lot.
I
But yeah, oh, last thing I would say is part of my
yeah.
thing now is just asking people like, have you ever had a weird experience that you haven't been able to
Mm.
explain, and getting them to talk about it publicly so we can all like destigmatize it.
Yes, I think this is amazing, and I honestly, and I feel this, and I know I've said this to you privately, but I feel like you are this bridge, and you've been brought here as this bridge specifically to bridge these two worlds together, and to encourage others to, like you said, now you've written this book, you're going to be that I see so many other people coming up talking about it, raising about it, and I really believe that that's your role here, and I know it's difficult for you to have to go through everything that you've been through, but it's I've got tingles right now. It was all meant to happen for a reason, and it's very I think I'm really just it took you a lot of guts for you to go and do this, but I think it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think honestly having people reach out to me has really helped a lot
Yeah,
because it makes you feel not so alone. I think like at the earlier parts of this journey I just felt very alone and
yeah,
very scared
yeah,
to come out with this. And then I think slowly you just have to keep, and that's the thing, at first you have to keep reminding yourself you're not alone, and then at some point you just know. And I feel like I'm
yes,
getting to that point where I know I'm not alone because so many people have come forward.
yes.
So that's nice.
I have got one question for you, and it is, if someone listening here is a skeptic, or they are very like science, let's say very science background, how can any of this spirituality stuff be true? What could you say to them right now to go, actually, you know what, be open to this, and what have you discovered? What have you learned over these past few years about the universe, and the spiritual side of things?
Yeah, so I view it like this, that I used to have this is obviously because I'm a scientist, I think of it like this, but like I used to have an Excel sheet of data and I had like locked the data. Like that was my worldview. I was like, this is the world, this is how the universe works. And I was forced through this journey to unlock the Excel sheet and add data and be like, precognitive dreams, we're all connected, psychic phenomena, like add things. And I've read a lot of different philosophies and things, and I'm still figuring it all out. But the one thing I remind myself now is to stay open, like keep the sheet open, keep adding to it. My personal mantra is stay radically curious, like just stay curious. And that's really helped me a lot instead of like when people used to tell me crazy stories in the beginning that I thought were crazy, that like in the book I talk about this, one of my intuitives I interviewed, she's like, oh, I've seen fairies and gnomes, and I was like, this is the beginning, so I was like, oh god, she's crazy. But then at that moment I was like, you know what, I'm just going to suspend disbelief. I know this person, she's actually not mentally ill, so I'm going to bring curiosity to why she is saying that, why she believes that, and which she may be. I believe her. I believe her experience.
Mm,
And maybe a more interesting question is, what does this mean? Like for her, what does it mean for me to hear
mm,
about fairies? What does it mean for us? Rather than is it real or not, which has
yes,
become a very uninteresting question to me.
yes,
um,
yes.
so I just keep updating and staying curious.
I love that.
And I
I love that.
encourage everyone to do that. And
Mm,
if someone says something to you that seems ridiculous, instead of immediately thinking that sounds ridiculous, just bring curiosity to it and be
yes.
like, why does this person believe that? What experiences have they had that have led them to believe this? And not in a skeptical way, just a curious, open way.
Yes, that's real. That is a really open way of looking at everything, isn't it? And I have to say, I had to go through lots of those similar things when I was opening up to the healing gifts that I have, to spirituality, because for you, it wasn't that I was brought up anti anything. I felt anti anything. I just was brought up with nothing. Like there is nothing, nothing exists, and that's what I thought for a long time. So I've had to be as openly curious as you have. And then actually I've heard things, maybe 10 years ago that I think, well, that's a bit strange, but now actually it all kind of makes sense to me, and it all flows through me, and I'm completely like open to spirit guides, angels. I'd be out 10 years ago, I'd be like, what are you talking? What are you talking about? But now,
Yeah.
do you know what? They talk through me. They communicate through me. And I can't, for me, it was very much like, well, I'm feeling it. It's happening. I can feel energy. I can feel these beings around me. Then I can't deny that that's happening,
Right.
and that was how it worked for me. I could actually feel it. Like, how can I deny energies flowing through my hands when I can actually feel it? And I couldn't
Yeah.
explain it scientifically. I don't have a science background at all. So that's always been my struggle. How do I? And I don't even try to explain it scientifically because I'm not a scientist. But that
Yeah.
was my way of understanding it.
Yeah, no, and that's part of what I try to point out in the book too, is
Yeah.
that personal experience is really important.
Mm,
And actually, our consciousness and our awareness, just in science, we don't understand consciousness at all. We don't understand how we're aware of being aware. And
mm,
so, even though we don't understand it and we tend to dismiss it, it's actually like half of the human, or more than half of the human experience. And what a shame that we're
yeah.
dismissing it. We need to look at it to understand.
Yeah.
And I think I forgot to answer one other part of your question. So
Yeah.
I do believe now that the universe is meaningful. So when you, in the scientific paradigm, the Western one, we believe the universe is random, dead, meaningless. So there's no meaning anywhere.
That's
Like
so
you're, and it's
sad.
kind of a, it's a depressing thing, right? You're like,
Yes.
oh, your life's events have no meaning. You have to make meaning out of them yourself.
Right.
And I realized that that's what was kind of depressing me, like earlier. And I now, not like I just believe it, but the evidence seems to suggest that the universe has meaning like embedded into it. I don't know what that means. I can't explain it scientifically, but
Yeah.
that's
So
yeah, that's
how
what.
much more fulfillment? I'd love to end this by knowing how much more fulfillment has it now brought your life, being able to feel free and open, to be able to, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
merge these two worlds, or feel like actually you can be. It feels like now you're being yourself fully, 100% yourself. And what, because some people listening aren't scientists, they're not necessarily particularly spiritual, but actually they struggle being themselves, and that is tricky for them. So how is it feel just knowing that you're being 100, so much more authentic in yourself, and expressing everything about you, not just sort of half of you?
Yeah, I feel so much, oh, I feel so much happier. And well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something I had to face too, is these like identities that you project as a scientist, or these things you think you're supposed to be for other people. Like I'm supposed to be rational and smart and grounded and not interested in fantasy or whatever it is. And yeah, I couldn't see that, which is the scary part. And now I can see it, but yeah, I'm so much happier now,
Yes.
so much more fulfilled, so much more at peace. And yeah, the sad thing is I wasn't aware that that was an issue before.
Yeah. Amazing, Mona. Thank you so much. This has been fascinating, and I can't wait. I can't wait to read the book. I know it's coming out in early September. I'm going to post all the links for it so people can either pre-order it, or they'll have the link to buy it when it's come out. Because I think it's going to be a book that goes big places, and I think there's much more for you. I see you on stages. I see you talking about this, and I know that's all going to happen. And the universe is such a wonderful, friendly, lovely place, and I always feel like it's always trying to be with you, not against you. So and I know you feel that now too. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing this with us, and thank you for being here with me on the She Shakes the World interview series.
Thank you for having me. This is
I
very fun.